Last week, we also saw the launch of the Yes campaign, Politics Free. There were no politicians in sight at the launch, and it was boosted by a $5 million donation. So where is it all up to at the moment? Well, joining me live is Dean Parkin, Director from the Heart. Thanks so much for your time, Dean. Good to see you once again. I feel like in the last week you've done your best and had big inroads in shifting the conversation back to basics where it needs to be, rather than, clouded in scenarios that are never really going to come to fruition. Is that how you win this thing? Is that how you win over the public? Just bring it back to basics. This is about Aboriginal recognition in the Constitution.
Yeah, absolutely, Laura. I mean, we've known right from the very beginning that the keys to success for this campaign, the keys to success for a successful referendum on recognition through a voice is through the people of Australia. That's how this all started. It started as an invitation from Indigenous peoples to the rest of the country. And so this won't be won or lost by politicians or media types or those that are in the bubble. It's going to come down to voters. It's going to come down to millions of voters voting yes. So that's where the conversation has to be, and that's why we've done a lot of work to make sure that that's where this conversation needs to be grounded going from here on.
I mentioned at the outset it was a political free event in South Australia last week. I imagine that was on purpose. And is that the problem here? It has got too political.
Well, I think some of the conversations over the summer was very much it felt very much like a conversation that was being had in the bubble. Experts and politicians and commentators, and look, we've been out on the ground a lot over the last. Well, we've been out on the ground a lot over the last 3 years on this issue, but particularly over the last couple of months, and there's a really strong call just to say, okay, well, that's sort of run its course now. Let's bring this back to where it should be. It was refreshing to be just focused on community members that were there in support of a yes vote on a voice. The politicians will have their say. There'll be more bills and machinery parts of this going forward. So they'll have their go. But it's more important now that it is about people in the communities, and even some of those people, Laura, who aren't even necessarily supporters, who are just curious about this. We want to create spaces for them to come in. This is a very welcoming campaign that we're running here. We want everybody to be part of this.
Yeah, well, look, we've just seen the Albanese government announce that $9.5 million will be put towards quote-unquote civics and an awareness campaign, which will include comprehensive information on the facts of the voice. Now, at the same time as announcing this, there's been an insistence that this is not a de facto funding for the Yes campaign. Do you welcome that move from the government? Is it necessary?
Yeah, we absolutely do welcome it, and it is very necessary. Of course, our job is the Yes campaign. That's our job, and it's important that is necessarily independent from government. That this is the campaign that gets out there and promotes the Yes vote. But let's also remember that we've heard a lot of conversations again this is why the conversations in the bubble can get really misleading, Laura. There's all of these questions about technicalities and details and what about that clause and this clause. And we can go out into the community and quite often have a conversation, and people say, well, what's the Constitution? And what's a referendum? It's been 24 years since this country has gone to the polls in a referendum. There's a whole chunk of the population that has never voted in a referendum. So it's really important if we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing by citizens and by voters, that they've got the information about these really key questions so they can build a fundamental understanding of what they're going to be asked for, because we know what they're going to be asked for when it comes to the actual vote is going to be very simple.
Yeah.
And so it's important that information's out there.
You're in the working group that has briefed Peter Dutton and other politicians as well. And you're landing on a set of words. Are you any closer to doing that? Is there a split over whether it should be to the Parliament or to executive government?
Well, the working group is due very soon to provide its final recommendations to the government on what the advice should be, and then that will obviously inform the referendum bill that will be put to the parliament. And yet again, the politicians will get to have their say again, as will Australians, through what is likely to be a public submission process. I'd say there's been an incredible spirit of wanting to get this done in the right way from the members of the working group. And far from calling it a split, I'd say the reason why this was set up was so the different views could be aired and talked through. And that's the reason why you run these processes, so you can get those different opinions on the table. So far from it being called a split, I'd say that the process is doing exactly what it was set up to do, which is to hear those different issues and then come to a final sort of recommendation on those key issues.
As if to highlight, you are not one homogenous group. Indeed, there are different views right across the spectrum, and we should welcome that as well, because you do produce out of that pretty healthy debate. As we're talking, Dean, something's just come across my desk as well, and it just highlights still the inequity within our society, with Indigenous Australians still, not enjoying the quality of life that many of us do. Darren Clark is the Action for Alice man in Alice Springs, and he often brings us and highlights stories that, for one reason or another, just aren't covered by mainstream media or just do not get the attention. He has just told Ben Fordham on 2GB that there's a young 6-year-old boy in Alice that tried to take his own life after witnessing the rape of his sister. Now, I was in Tennant Creek a couple of years ago reporting on the rape of a 2-year-old little girl. These aren't isolated incidents. When we talk about the voice and needing to do something meaningful, is it these children that you have in mind?
Well, I can say, it's very hard to explain what it feels like hearing that story, Laura. I can say unequivocally that the people who were involved in recommending that we do recognition through a voice, the number one thing at the top of their mind was care for their children and for the futures of their children. That is what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people talked about through Ullaru's statement, and the need for a voice. Now, the reasons why they say that, and more often than not, it is the women in our communities, the aunties and the nans and the mums. There's been some media attention in the last couple of months. These people are out on the ground talking about this and calling for their voices to be heard on a daily basis, and they've been ignored. That's the whole point of this voice, is to make sure that those people who are dealing with these issues are finally and properly being heard, because that's where the solutions are. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. Look, Dean, I bring this up because I think part of the No campaign is almost a convoluted message. Okay, what is this going to mean for people on the ground? What practical changes are there going to be? Well, there's not ever been a perfect policy solution. No one's pretending that the voice will stop something like that happening that Darren Clark just told us about. But I feel like it does at least make these people feel like they're heard. And that might seem a little bit esoteric and a bit too airy-fairy, but that's important in and of itself, isn't it?
It is important. And the really interesting thing is that even those that are opposing the voice will agree that the status quo is not good enough. We can't just keep doing the same things over and over again. You hear sometimes people say, you shouldn't be talking about a voice, you should be talking about the practical things. Well, what do you think governments have been doing for the last 2 decades? They have been focused on the practical things. The problem is they're not involving the people who understand what practically works on the ground, which is the mums, the aunties, the nanas, the uncles, who see the impact of policies and laws on their communities on a day-to-day basis. And you're right, Laura, nobody's pretending that the day after the referendum succeeds, that will click our fingers and everything will be perfect. But it is absolutely the foundation for real change and real progress on the ground. And even those that are opposed to the referendum will still argue that we do need to give more voice to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And I know Peter Dutton has said, he's still making his mind up. And Peter has said that there needs to be a voice as well in recognition of the fact that that's where the solutions lie. So I don't think there's any argument here around the fact that we can't just keep doing the same things and that we get better outcomes when you involve those people in the ground, when we actually listen to their voices from the ground. So I think as this information starts to flow, as our work starts to increase, as the more information gets out there, Australians will see that because they're over the lack of action on this too. There's deep frustration across the board about the lack of action, and everybody wants to see better outcomes. The voice is the starting point, and we think Australians will see that and get on board.
I think so. Dean Parkin, always good to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Laura.